The State of the Climate und gründete die internationale Diskussionsplattform Climate Dialogue, die von der niederländischen Regierung finanziert wird und wurde von eben dieser Regierung mit der Überprüfung des 5. Sachstandsberichts des IPCC, des AR5, beauftragt. Danach schrieb er zusammen mit Nick Lewis den Bericht der Global Warming Policy Foundation A Sensitive Matter. Crok veröffentlichte auch einige Peer-Review-Artikel, darunter einen über Temperaturkorrekturen in den Niederlanden, die zum Verschwinden historischer Hitzewelle führten. Im Jahr 2019 gründete Crok zusammen mit dem emeritierten Professor der TU Delft, Guus Berghut, die CLINTEL Foundation. Das steht für Climate Intelligence Foundation. Beide veröffentlichten die Weltklimaerklärung mit der zentralen Botschaft, es gibt keinen Klimanotstand. Heute spricht Marcel Crok über Warum es keinen Klimanotstand gibt, eine Analyse des IPCC AR6-Berichts. Marcel, the floor is yours.
So, okay, look, it's working immediately. That's great. So, yeah, well, hopefully I can keep you awake a little bit after all this German. I've listened, I don't remember how long ago it was that, yeah, I think last year in Gera I was there as a visitor. So it's great. I'm a bit jealous of Benny Peiser. His German is really excellent. I'm sorry, maybe one day I come back and speak German, but for today you have to do it in English. I'm not promising that I will keep it very short like Benny, but I will try to save the lunch. Thanks Wolfgang for the introduction because it saves some time. Like he said, I am a science journalist. My background is in chemistry, and then I became a science journalist. And in 2005, I worked for 2 months. I worked on the famous hockey stick graph, the hockey stick, Michael Mann hockey stick. And I worked with McIntyre and McKittrick, and I more or less had the scoop of their work in 2005. So I wrote a long article for a Dutch magazine, and it was translated into English. And then immediately I was in the middle of not only the Dutch climate debate, I was in the middle of the global climate debate, you know. And it was my first article ever about climate, but I was immediately in the center of the debate. And you must have heard about the ClimateGate emails. And my article was even in the ClimateGate emails, you know. So it was really like I was in the center. And what really surprised me, and the reason that I'm here today, was not, of course, this article was really quite something, because my article explained that the hockey stick was like broken, it was like junk, it was junk science, yeah, the work of McIntyre and McKittrick. But what surprised me was the reaction of KNMI in Holland, you know, our climate institute, and internationally the reaction of the IPCC. I was quite naive at the time. I was thinking, okay, we now, McIntyre and McKittrick, they discovered an error, and now KNMI and IPCC, they are going to repair it. You know, they will move on, they will acknowledge the error, and then we can move on. That was quite naive, of course, because they didn't acknowledge the error, and they still don't acknowledge the error. I will show in a minute. So, that's my background, and so then I decided, okay, so what's going on here? If they don't acknowledge this error, what about other stuff in the climate field, you know? We have to check that. And I decided to quit my job. I worked on a book, The State of the Climate, and then in 2019, together with Guus Berghout, I founded CLINTEL. And CLINTEL, you can compare CLINTEL with EIKE and with the Global Warming Policy Foundation. But we are really internationally orientated. And so we published this World Climate Declaration. And it became, I was in the beginning, I was not very enthusiastic about it. Another declaration, you know, we have had the Oregon petition, we have had so many declarations. And Guus wanted to do this, and I said, okay, go ahead, let's try it, you know. But the power of this declaration is that it is really short. It's only 1 page, and it's only 6 statements, and everybody, also journalists working for press agencies, they can at least read it. So it gets attention. And so we have now 1,450 people who signed the declaration. You can sign it. Are there signees here? I suppose that there must be some signees over there. Some German. Are there some German over here? Not more? So, okay, after the conference, go to our website and sign up for the declaration, you know, because we need more people signing up for this declaration. So we have a German page, so where you can read the declaration. That's also an advantage. The declaration has been translated into many languages: Spanish, French, Portuguese, Japanese, you name it, and we have a translation. And so we also work with ambassadors. So Frits Varenholt, you all know him, of course. Frits Varenholt is our German ambassador. So if there is something going on in Germany, we ask Frits, what's going on? Can you help us? Or can you translate something for us? You know, and so we have this international network. And so I'm not going to read this, but I thought, okay, let's be generous and put our main message in German. So this is from the German climate declaration: Es gibt keinen Klimanotstand. Yeah, okay. Let's move on. Another project that I really want to mention is this. For many years, of course, I've been writing articles, I've been writing books, I've been writing reports, like for Benny Peiser about climate sensitivity. But sometimes you feel like, oh, okay, I'm trying, but I'm getting nowhere. The activists, they win, and they have all the money, they have all the press, the media, etc., etc. So in Holland, we now have a court case. We have had many court cases, but now we have a court case between Friends of the Earth, and they attacked Shell, our famous oil company. Yeah? And this court case was initiated from what we call in Holland the public interest. Oh, then we thought, okay, but CLINTEL also stands for the public interest. Maybe we can join this court case. And so this year I worked a lot with a Dutch lawyer, a good friend, and he knows a lot about the climate debate, and we decided that CLINTEL is going to intervene. So we now joined this court case as a third party. And what is nice, you can go to our website, our international website, the climatecaseofthecentury.org, and you can join us. Because in the first instance, in the court, Friends of the Earth won their court case against Shell. And the judge in Holland said, Shell now has to reduce its emissions in 2030 with 45% compared to 2019. Not 1990, but 2019. So that's a lot of reduction. But what's most interesting is that this court case also covers their so-called Scope 3 emissions. Well, what is Scope 3 emissions? Those are the emissions of the consumers, global consumers. So if you will go to a Shell station in 2030 and you will fill your car with benzene in 2030, Shell has to arrange, according to a Dutch judge, that this benzene will reduce 45% less CO2. So it is a Dutch decision by a judge who has a global impact on Shell. It is a crazy court case, but if you analyze the documents that were released, not everything is released, but the documents that are released, then you see that Shell didn't at all defend itself. They only said, well, you know, you now attack us, but you don't attack our competitors, like Exxon or the other oil companies. So this is not fair. This is not fair. This is the only argument that they made. For the rest, they accepted everything. So Friends of the Earth said, there is a climate emergency. Shell said, we totally agree with you. We must fulfill the Paris Agreement. We totally agree with you. So they agreed with everything that Friends of the Earth said. And then the judge said, well, if you agree with everything from them, then I also believe that you have to do more than you now promised. You know? And so it is a ridiculous case. But I think that for us, like EIKE or CLINTEL or the Global Warming Policy Foundation, for too long, we have been sitting here and we thought, okay, as soon as people start really reading about it and thinking about it, they will acknowledge our points, you know. But it's not going to happen. So we have to fight back. You know, that's now. I didn't become an activist. I still want to write books and reports and nice articles and trying to make the debate more clear to the audience. But at the same time, I realized that if we want to make more impact, then we have to fight back. And this is what CLINTEL now is going to do. Okay. My main theme for today is this report. This is the 6th IPCC report. This is the Working Group 1 report that was published last year. And when it came out, me and a group of people from the CLINTEL network, we decided we should have an in-depth analysis of the report. So with a group of people, we decided to look into certain aspects. The report, of course, is very, very thick. It's only the Working Group 1 report is already 2,500 pages. Yeah, most of it is extremely boring because it is describing thousands and thousands of research articles. But of course, they come up with the summary for policymakers. They make claims, and we analyze certain claims. Not all the claims, of course, because then we would need hundreds of people and even more time. But soon, I hope next week or so, we are going to release our report, and you're actually now the first audience that can listen to our results. So, we had a few people working with us. Nicolas Cavetta is also here. He will talk about some issues. He worked on the solar chapter. Fahrenhold worked on the solar chapter. We have Andy May on top there. Andy May is an American blogger. This is Ross McKittrick. You all know him, of course. He wrote a chapter about the tropical hotspot. I'm not going to talk about that. Javier Viños is an unknown. He's a medical researcher, but he wrote this amazing book about climate of the past. It was published this year, and I encourage everybody to. It's free. There is a free PDF somewhere online. But you can also buy the book. It's quite expensive though. But there is a free PDF available online. Okay. So, when I was preparing this talk, I was like, okay, what did we learn about this new IPCC report? And we also have a period, the COVID pandemic period, behind us, of course. And in this period, I decided for the first time that I should read George Orwell, 1984. I heard of a lot, of course, about the book, but I never actually read the book. And then we went into lockdown and mandatory vaccination, almost mandatory vaccination. I think it was here in Germany even harsher than in the Netherlands. But nevertheless, so I decided I have to read George Orwell, 1984. And when I was preparing this talk, I realized that there are a lot of similarities between how the IPCC is behaving and how 1984 describes a future dystopian society. So I'm going to use a little bit parallels between the IPCC and 1984 of George Orwell, in which you probably know this, you have this Ministry of Truth. Yeah? And the Ministry of Truth, they have a few mottos, a few slogans, and those slogans are printed on the wall of the Ministry of Truth, yeah, in the book. And those slogans are, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. You know? And I decided to add 2 slogans for the IPCC, and those are, warm is cold, and down is up. Yeah? And I'm going to explain why this is happening, how and why this is happening inside the IPCC report. So, you may have noticed that the hockey stick, after McIntyre and McKittrick criticized the hockey stick, that was in the third IPCC report in 2001, then in the 4th and the 5th IPCC report, they had this spaghetti graphs, you know, they showed many reconstructions, but they didn't have a clear hockey stick, so they were a bit afraid after the criticism of McIntyre and McKittrick. But in the 6th IPCC report, to our surprise, they came up with a brand new hockey stick. There it is again. Yeah? And this time there was a very interesting, this bar is very interesting because it says, the warmest multi-century period in more than 100,000 years. So, you may know that the hockey stick originally was the last 1,000 years. So Michael Mann said it's now warmer than in the last millennium. Yeah? Which meant that it was warmer now than in the medieval warm period. Yeah? That's the hockey stick discussion about. But now, they claim here 2,000 years, but here they claim it is now warmer than in the last 100,000 years. Oh my gosh. Of course, most of this period was Ice Age, so that's logic. But they now claim that during the Holocene, so during the last 12,000 years, after the Ice Age ended, that it is now the warmest period of this 12,000 years. Well, let's look into that. So, Javier Viñols, this Spanish guy, this Spanish scientist, he wrote our chapter about this. And this reconstruction is based on the work of Kaufman. It's the Pages 2K. This is a group of scientists, they call themselves Pages 2K, 2,000 years. Yeah? And this reconstruction is based on that. But here, no, first the Holocene. Here's the last 12,000 years. The last 12,000 years in the IPCC report are based on the work of Kaufman et al., so the Pages 2K. Not the Pages 2K, but Kaufman et al., sorry. And as you see here, here is the error bar. This is drafted by Viñols. And you see that the error bar is going much higher than this gray bar. So, Viñols is making the point that even if you take the reconstruction of Kaufman just for granted, then even then, their claim is untrue. So this bar should be higher than that, you know? And if it goes up like this, then it was at a certain point in the past, it could have been higher the temperature than now, you know? And also you have to realize, of course, that here you're talking about yearly temperatures, and here the reconstruction is much more smoothed, yeah? So you're comparing different, you're comparing apples with oranges. Let's go on. So this is what they claim, yeah? And okay, this is the key graph in our chapter. This is a complicated graph. I will go through it quickly. It's not that complicated, but this is made by Javier Viñols, the Spanish guy. What you see here is the last 12,000 years. Ice Age, we came out of the Ice Age. And here is the ice sheet. The ice sheet in America and Scandinavia is melting. You know, this is melting. So, and the black line is a reconstruction from Marcot. That is a mainstream reconstruction, but it is a little bit, it's a little bit adapted by Viñols. And so the temperature is inverted. So this is cold, and now the black line is going to warm up, warm up, warm up. And here you see obliquity. So this is the Milankovitch cycle. And the Milankovitch cycle, especially at 60 degrees north. So this is showing that around 8,000, 9,000 years, there was much more sunlight approaching there, 60 north, than there is nowadays. And what he wants to show with this reconstruction is that from 8,000, 9,000 years ago, forced by the Milankovitch cycle, the Earth already started cooling. And this period, and the German speaker, the Abora Gorlich, also mentioned it, this is called the Holocene thermal maximum, or the Holocene climate optimum. Yeah? And here, this is important, here you see in black areas in the northern hemisphere that have glacial advances. So if you show nothing, there is no glacial advance. If you see a bar here, then it means that there are areas in which there is a glacial advance. Well, and you see that here around this period, the glaciers were receding, and in the last few millennia, the glaciers, most of the glaciers were extending and not receding. Yeah? So this, in our view, is a much more likely picture of our climate history in the last 12,000 years than the IPCC is painting. So what the IPCC is doing all the time with the hockey stick is making our climate in the past rather flat, and then starting in 1850 it suddenly goes up. So their message is our climate was more or less stable, and when we started using fossil fuels, then it all went wrong, you know, then it went quickly up. Unprecedented rate, unprecedented climate change. This is still the main message of the IPCC. And if you look for Holocene thermal maximum or Holocene climate optimum in the report, you hardly find any mention. You know, so they don't even want to talk about it. So, okay, now let's now focus a little bit on the last 2,000 years. This is from the website by McIntyre, Climate Audit. McIntyre did quite a lot of analysis of the new hockey stick. And here he showed, he randomly selected proxies from this reconstruction. You know, the proxies are like coral, tree rings, ocean sedimentation, etc. Those are the proxies that are behind this new hockey stick. And what he wants to show is that if you randomly select proxies, and this is the final reconstruction, you see a spectacular, a dramatic increase here. But you see that most of the proxies don't show anything. And this is the main conclusion from McIntyre after all these years that he was blogging about it, that most proxies don't show anything. If you just assemble hundreds of proxies and you make an average, you see noise. You don't see anything. And any time that these groups of scientists, this hockey team, that they come up with a new reconstruction, it means that they give more weight to certain proxies than to other proxies. This is the way how they can create hockey sticks. Yeah? It doesn't say anything about the real climate history. And he gives one example, and this is my example of that down is up. It has happened a few times in hockey stick reconstructions that so this pages to K, this is a tree ring from Asia. This is in Pakistan. This is a tree ring. And this is in the new hockey stick. This is in the new IPCC hockey stick. But McIntyre, he downloaded the data and he used the standard software for working on the proxy data. And when he used the standard software, this is the result. So this is based on exactly the same data from Pakistan, the same tree ring data. Yeah? So he is saying that, okay, from 1800, the tree ring suggests that the climate in Pakistan is going down, but this is how IPCC used the same data. Yeah? So down is up. Yeah? And on his website, what I wanted to show, that was another very funny example of down is up. On the blog of McIntyre, there is a famous proxy, it's called the Tiljander proxy. It's a sediment proxy from a lake in Finland. And the original proxy is going down in the 20th century. But there is a problem with that proxy. And the authors, the Finnish scientists, they describe this. They explain that in the 20th century, the sediment in the lake was disturbed by human activity, agriculture and stuff like that, you know. And so you should not use that part of the reconstruction. But anyway, it was going down. So it suggested that if at all it was useful, then it suggested that in Finland, the Little Ice Age was warmer than the 20th century, that there was a cooling from the Little Ice Age to the modern 20th century. That's ridiculous, of course. We know that this wasn't the case. It was colder in the Little Ice Age, and it is now a little bit warmer. Yeah? But then, what was really funny was that Michael Mann in 2008, he used this Tiljander proxy that was going down, but he flipped it. He flipped it upside down. So the part that was going down in the 20th century was going up in Michael Mann's reconstruction in 2008. You know, and this was, this was really crazy. So this was really like down is going up. Okay, so let's talk about sea level rise. We have 2 chapters in our report about sea level rise, because it's a very important topic, of course, not only for Holland, that is partly under the sea, but for many countries in the world. So, in the new report, in AR6, they claim that sea level rise is accelerating. Yeah? And in the report, not in the summary for policymakers, in the report they show this graph, suggesting that here is an acceleration. This is the period that we also have satellite measurements, and the satellite, they have a rate of increase of 3 millimeters a year, and the tide gauges, we have the long-term tide gauges along the coast, and they more or less, normally they showed 2 millimeters a year. So there seems to be a little bit of an acceleration. And this is how they write it in the summary for policymakers. So they say it was first 1.3 between 1901 and 1971, then it increased to 1.9 between 1971 and 2006, and then it increased to 3.7. Whoa! From 1.9 to 3.7 in the period 2006-2018. Notice that this is a very short period. If you talk about sea level, you also have to deal with the tidal, with the movements of the moon, and you have an 18-year cycle, and so you have all kinds of problems if you look at very short periods. Nevertheless, this is what they claimed. But what they didn't show is that one of their papers, you cannot see it here, but I think it was the red one. The red one is a paper by Frederikse et al., 2020. And Frederikse et al. Is not based on tide gauges. No, it's based on a so-called sea level budget study. So what he's doing, he's trying to say, okay, what is the contribution from Greenland? What is the contribution from Antarctica? What is the contribution from the warming ocean to the sea level? And then he adds up all these numbers, and then he concludes the sea level rise should be 3 millimeters or so much. Yeah, but in Frederikse et al., he also shows this graph. And you might be familiar with it. This is the rate of sea level rise. And then you suddenly see that in the early warm period, so the period 1910-1940, the rate of sea level rise also increased to about almost 3 millimeters a year. Yeah, and so this is mainly pointing in the multi-decadal oscillations that we see, like the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation and the influence that that has on the sea level. Yeah? IPCC is totally ignoring that, is not showing this graph. It's not showing this graph, and then concludes that the current acceleration is, of course, they claim, they don't write it, but they claim that this has everything to do with the greenhouse gases. Okay, we also have a second chapter written by Ole Humlum. You probably all know him. He has this wonderful website with all this climate data, climateforyou.com, and he looked at what is called the IPCC launched a sea level tool where you can go to this website and you can simply look at what is going to happen with the sea level in Bremen or in a city that you or in a place where you're interested in, and so you can make your own sea level scenario. And what is funny about that tool is that in 2020, the moment that they launched this tool, it has a sea level jump everywhere around the world. And so it's very funny because Ole mainly looked at Scandinavian sites, and you know, of course, that in Scandinavia the sea level is actually going down because Scandinavia is still going up from the effect from the last ice age. So the sea level there is going down. But according to the IPCC, this is going to change very soon, because starting today, this trend will be reversed in a positive trend. And of course, I mean, I wonder who is going to believe this, but this is what they show for all the Scandinavian sites, that the sea level is going to change. Okay, let's continue. I have some more examples. Snow cover is very important, of course, because we all learned from climate alarmists that snow will be something of the past, you know. Our kids will not know anymore what snow is because it will disappear. So AR6 says human influence very likely contributed to the decrease in Northern Hemisphere spring snow cover since 1950. I wanted to show this first because what they showed in the report is brand new data. And so what they show now in AR6 is this table. And what you see here, the key is here, because this all going to the left, if it would go to the right, it would be an increase. And if it's going to the left, it is a decrease. So now they claim, with this graph, they claim that in all months of the year, there is now a decreasing trend. And this is something new, because so far we had a paper by Ronan Connolly, the Irish researcher Ronan Connolly, a few years ago, and he showed that in winter and in autumn there actually is an increasing trend, based on the so-called Rutgers snow data set. Yeah? So far we thought, okay, in spring and summer there is a certain decline, but in autumn and winter there is an increase. And Ronan Connolly, he showed that the models expect a decrease in autumn and they expect a decrease in winter, but it was not confirmed with the data. So this is a peer-reviewed paper by Ronan showing that the models don't reproduce the trends in the snow cover in the autumn and the winter. But then came the trick from the IPCC. What did they do? They introduced a Canadian author, Mudrick, and Mudrick came up with this new data set. And this new data set was launched already in the first order draft. So the IPCC report is going through several drafts. So you have the first order draft, then you can review that, then you have the second order draft, you can review that, and then you get a summary for policymakers draft, and then you get the final report, you know. And this data was already in the first draft, but what's interesting, the paper itself wasn't yet published. So it was a brand new data set introduced in the first order draft, but at the time you were not able to read the paper because it was not yet published. And Mudrick, of course, was one of the authors of the AR6 report. So, and this is what we see a lot happening in the IPCC, that they introduce new authors, they introduce their own work, yeah, and then so they promote their own work in the IPCC, and then for reviewers it is extremely difficult to check what is going on. And actually I asked Willis Eschenbach. Willis Eschenbach is a famous blogger at What's Up With That, and he's very good with data. So I asked Willis, could you have a look at the data? Because this is not simple like measurements. No, this is what they call a blended or a hybrid data set. It is based on 6 or 7 different data sets. And they are blended, like the hockey stick reconstructions, they are blended together. And some of these data sets are measurements, but some of these data sets are models, and some of these data sets are reanalysis data. Reanalysis data is a combination of weather information and models. Yeah? And so Willis was unable to download all the data, let alone that we now can judge whether this is like a valid reconstruction. And so if you go back to the Rutgers University, yeah, this is from Ole Humlem's side, and you see the full picture. So this is in the winter, of course, you have a lot of snow, and in the summer, very little snow. And this is the last 50, 60 years. And you see, if there is a trend, it is a very, very, very tiny, minor trend. There is not much going on. But nevertheless, IPCC, based on a brand new data set, which we cannot really check, concluded that now there is a decrease in all months of the year. Let's go on to a very important topic, because, of course, when the IPCC report came in the media, you had all kinds of covers, newspapers like this, you know. And of course, the suggestion that was being made in the media was that the climate is getting more extreme. You know, we get more wildfires, we get more drought, we get more floods, etc., etc., etc. But what did the IPCC report actually say about this? Well, you have a guy named Roger Pielke Jr., you're probably also familiar with him, with his work, and within a day he posted this table, because he went into the report in the 2,500 pages, and he summarized what IPCC is saying about extremes. And he says, okay, some things they say they have changed. So first you have to change, you have to detect a change, and then you can say, is there attribution? Can we say this has something to do with greenhouse gases? Yeah? And if you take the IPCC report at face value, yeah, you just accept what they are saying in the report. This is what Roger is doing here. They say heat waves, yes, there is a change. There is an increase in heat waves. Yes, we claim, the IPCC claim it has to do with greenhouse gases. Heavy precipitation, yes, yes. Ecological drought, agricultural drought, that's interesting. In the last report, they were talking about drought. Now, suddenly, they have 4 categories of drought. Yeah? But the most climate-related categories are meteorological drought and hydrological drought. They are climate-related. And what does the IPCC say about those? No trend detected, so no attribution. Flooding, no trend detected, of course, no attribution. If there is no trend, you don't have to attribute anything. Tropical cyclones, no. Winter storms, thunderstorms, tornadoes, hail, lightning, extreme winds, No, 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 no. And then you have to realize that cyclones, hurricanes, flooding, drought, these are the events that cause most of the damage and most of the casualties of the extremes. Yeah? So now the question is, what did the IPCC say about this? Because this is really important. This is really important information. So these very important extremes, they have no trend and no attribution. And this, of course, is very, very good news. So what did the IPCC say about this in the summary for policymakers? I had a slide about this, and the slide was empty. They didn't say anything about it. And this is what I called, in my slide, hiding the good news. Yeah, this is what I wrote a report for Benny Pijzer many years ago. I talked about that in EIKE also, about climate sensitivity. And our report with Nick Lewis was like a sensitive matter, how the IPCC hit the good news about global warming, hit the good news about climate sensitivity. And this is exactly what they did with the extremes. So they didn't mention this at all. But in the media, it was claimed that extremes were increasing, etc., etc. Well, okay. Another very important topic is the damage caused by hurricanes, but also by flooding. And Roger Puke Jr. is also an expert on this. And he has a paper, it's called Normalized Hurricane Damage in the United States. And this paper has 1,200 citations. And what is meant by normalized is that, of course, if you had a hurricane in 1904, you had a hurricane in Miami, but not many people were living there, and their houses were not very big, etc., etc. So if the same hurricane now strikes Miami, you have more capital, you have more people, so you have more damage. So if you want to know if there is an increasing climate trend, you have, of course, to normalize the data. You have to correct for the increase in the population and the increase of the economy. And that is called normalized damage. And Roger Puke Jr. is an expert on this. And his paper is cited in the literature 1,200 times. It was ignored by the IPCC. And there was another study by Grinstead. It has only 25 citations. It used a cherry-pick period, so it starts in a low hurricane period, and then it goes up a little bit. And what happened in the report was really amazing. Roger Puke Jr., in a peer-reviewed paper this year, he showed a table with 54 peer-reviewed publications about normalized damage. 54 publications. Only one publication out of these 54 claimed that there is an increase in normalized damage because due to flooding, hurricanes, all the kind of extremes. Guess which papers were mentioned by the IPCC in AR6? Only the single paper out of 54 this paper, that was the only one that was mentioned in AR6 when they talked about normalized damage. And all other 53 papers that said that there is no increase in normalized damage, they were all ignored. And that is really shameless cherry picking. Yeah? So that was my next category. That is, the trick is plain old cherry picking. Let's talk about scenarios and then I will stop. So this is also very important. In George Orwell, you also have a very famous quote, and that is, he who controls the past controls the future. And of course, we all know that in the IPCC reports, scenarios are very important. You know, the scenarios to 2100, because then they claim, oh, we get 2 meters of sea level rise, we get 4 degrees of warming, we get so much more flooding, etc., etc., etc. They have literally hundreds of papers, thousands of papers dealing with this kind of scenarios. And you might have heard that you have this highest scenario, it's called RCP 8.5. That's the highest scenario of the IPCC. That was the highest scenario in AR5, in the 5th IPCC report. And in the 5th IPCC report, this scenario was called a business as usual scenario, which means that in The Guardian and in other newspapers in the Netherlands as well, they could claim that if we do nothing, then we will follow this scenario. And that would lead to 4 degrees or 5 degrees of warming in 2100. 5 degrees of warming in 2100, that's quite something, you know. We have had 1 degree of warming in the last 150 years. So, what did they say about the scenarios? But what happened in the past few years, is that this is the high scenario. This is now called SSP 8.5. And what happened if you compare the scenarios with what is going on in the real world? And the real world is the blue line, and that's at the bottom of this range of scenarios. And so there have been a couple of papers explaining that these high-end scenarios, RCP 8.5, but also SSP 7, those are now the 2 highest scenarios, that these scenarios are completely implausible. They are completely crazy, actually. Yeah? And so, when the report came out, Roger Pielke, who is also publishing about this, was very eager to learn about what did they say about that. And to his surprise, they said, in the beginning of the report, they say, in general, no likelihood is attached to the scenarios. Think about that. IPCC should be policy neutral, but also policy relevant. As a policymaker, what do you want to know? You want to know what is the most likely scenario that we are now following. IPCC is using 5 scenarios, but they say we are not going to say anything about the likelihood of these 5 scenarios. So, which one is more likely? We are not going to say anything. But we have had some papers in the literature by Justin Ritchie, he was the first in 2017, and he explained RCP 8.5 is extremely unlikely and should not be used for policy purposes. That was in his conclusions. So what was the IPCC going to do with that paper? Well, they ignored it. They don't mention this paper. They mention a few others. They mention Housefather and Peters, because Housefather and Peters, they are friends of IPCC people. So they are willing to mention those authors. But by mentioning them, they say here, the likelihood of high emission scenarios such as RCP 8.5 or SSP 8.5, these are the same scenarios, is considered low in light of recent developments in the energy sector. Now that is interesting. So first they say no likelihood is attached, but then they say this scenario has a low likelihood. Makes no sense. But it is an admission of the IPCC that the high-end scenarios are now extremely unlikely. They are not, I called it in my chapter, I wrote this chapter for our report, I called it in the chapter a worst case scenario, and then I sent it for review to Roger Pielke, and he wrote back, it is not even a worst case scenario, because a worst case scenario has to be plausible. And this is an implausible scenario. For example, to get there, to follow this scenario, we have now around 6,000, more than 6,000 coal-fired power plants in the world. If you want to follow this scenario, you need 32,000 new coal-fired power plants in the coming century. 32,000 new coal power plants is not going to happen. So the IPCC is using totally outdated scenarios that are implausible. But in the report, this scenario is most often used of all scenarios. So in the literature, most of the scientific groups, they use this scenario. Okay, Wolfgang, I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Marcel, thanks a lot. Vielen Dank für die tolle Präsentation.